GM literally falls short on some of their targets for sales this year. Could it in fact be the end for GM as we know it? Well, Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, the company in fact which has been bailed out time and time again, they're facing some hot water. Yes, well, they've seen some major success this year. In 2023, they've definitely nailed some of their sales targets with the sales of internal combustion engines, trucks, SUVs, vehicles with high profit margins, and that's been enough to keep them afloat. Till now. Things are changing though. Unfortunately, even with stationary targets in terms of stock prices, they've been maintaining steady state abilities and they're able to hold their own for the time being. New targets. For example, I heard the latest thing today. Canada is literally playing hardball. For example, saying by 2035, 0% emission vehicles only for sale. They are literally dropping a hard line. We know there's some states in California, areas in Europe have already adopted a lot of those targets where they're saying zero emissions by 2030 or 2035. Means that GM is seriously in a rough spot. And why is that? Well, primarily because even though they've seen great targets, they've achieved massive sales and profits have been higher than they've ever dreamed, especially since Mary Barra, of course, who is the CEO and clearly has brought GM out of a bit of a hole. Her last tenure basically within the organization has been one to keep them trucking along, pardon the pun. But unfortunately, that's not enough to keep them going for the long term. Electric vehicles clearly is in the radar for many manufacturers as well as many countries across the globe. We also can't forget that China, right now, everybody's forgetting about China, but they build vehicles like the Polestar or they provide technology for Volvo, Polestar, vehicles like that. China are developing currently a lot of EVs in China. Sure, we don't necessarily adopt that and get on board here in North America, primarily because some heavy tariffs to the tune of about 27.5% are applied to vehicles that are brought in that way. However, China's not sitting on their laurels. They're able to develop these electric vehicles cheap, dirty, as well because their construction manufacturing costs are way lower than what we see typically in North America, as well as a lot of their products and their battery development is done in-house, and a lot of the supply chains that we rely on in North America come directly from China. Everything is done on the cheap and dirty, and they can be far more competitive than anybody can possibly dream of, particularly GM, for example. Now, Mary Barra is also trying to develop this technology, robo-taxis, where we're seeing things go off the road and accidents happen. Clearly, it's not quite there yet. We've got Tesla as well trying to currently enhance what they're bringing to the table for vehicles. We know that they're trying to bring a more cost-effective model. We're hearing models like a Model 2, for example, that Tesla's bringing to the plate are seeing some struggles. And a lot of the manufacturing components for that are coming out of Mexico. So now Mexico is a key player. Mexico is providing potentially some battery development for Tesla, as well as some of these Chinese companies are starting to look out at Mexico as the staging place across this side of the pond. So they're able to get some of their development and build in Mexico, lower cost of construction, lower cost of manufacturing, and then market it from that spot. So clearly, China has got their sights set on selling their products across to the North American market. Once that happens, that puts companies like GM, who are clearly, under union environments, at a much more disadvantage. Yes, built in America, and a lot of the products might be built well. There definitely might be some pride in construction, but the simple fact remains they're not as competitive as what we're seeing over in the Chinese markets. And so that's going to be a strong uphill battle and a big headwind for car manufacturers like GM, even Stellantis, who are struggling. They're on the bottom of the big three in terms of trying to bring some electrification to the marketplace. And then there's Ford, which have proven that they're cutting some of their development in half on the F-150 Lightnings because they just can't get these vehicles to market. The profit margins are high, but people aren't buying them necessarily what they're hoping. The Ford Mustang Mach-E Lightning's not selling as they hoped. And so clearly the big three are not necessarily getting what they hoped out of this. Now, GM did say that this year, 2023, was supposed to be a big breakout year for EVs coming from General Motors, but sadly that's just not happening. They just sort of missed the boat. They were too busy sucking up the profits from the internal combustion engines. Again, the Chevy Silverados and the GMs, all those products, Yukons, as well as Escalades, you name it. Everything that GM was building was still servicing the conventional marketplace. And while we know that that is still the biggest part of the North American market, we cannot ignore what's going on in the inevitable of the electrification marketplace, where Tesla is still leading the charge and GM is nowhere near that. GM's fallen flat in many cases. For example, like the Chevy Bolt, they've had to retract that again. A lot of the attention has not been on electrification, and every year that goes by, GM forgets about it, is another year wasted, because all the other players are playing the game and they're showing up with some of their products to the table, hoping to sell their cars to you, the consumer. GM's not doing that. And so while car companies like BYD, MG, as well as Chevy are looking for the Mexican side of the border, the tariffs or lack thereof, free trade agreement, clearly there's some strong support for the manufacturers that are building their vehicles in North America, means that Mexico could be a great opportunity. But unfortunately, Washington Times says Washington has raised some serious concerns with Mexico. But even that doesn't unfortunately go without its challenges, and there's strong advice from outsiders saying, don't put your eggs in all of that same basket and just be careful. Don't do anything stupid. Why? Because with all of the political challenges, with water supply issues, permitting problems, Mexico still does have some serious Jersey barriers parked right in front of these vehicles. And sadly enough, even GM is going to find themselves with an uphill battle, even utilizing the likes of Mexico to be one of their frontline opportunists to provide batteries and manufacturing. It's definitely not the silver bullet that everybody's hoping for. GM has to try to get on that wagon, but they're already clearly behind the 8 ball, and they're in a spot now where a lot of these other electrified manufacturers are now 2 or 3 steps ahead of GM, puts them in a rough spot. Just ask Ford how that's going for them, especially with the Mustang Mach-E. If they don't play their cards right at GM and make a vehicle that's affordable for the masses, sure, you can build a $200,000 Hummer EV, but good luck in selling that to people who actually have the money. You got to remember, we're trying to hit the profits. Yeah, well, you want to maximize profit margin. You also want to be able to sell numbers. If you can't sell the numbers, those vehicles are a flop. And so that's where a lot of these manufacturers like GM are going to struggle. The high cost of manufacturing, the union plants, the supply chain challenges, all means that there are going to be some headwinds there just for GM to try to recoup some of those costs, and their margins could shrink dramatically as opposed to other companies, for example, like Chinese companies, or even more so like Tesla, who manages to sell directly to the customer and as well opts out for the middleman essentially at the dealership level. So that's where GM is going to struggle further. They have to keep the lights on at the dealer level, but they have to still make their profits. Now, I know we're not worried about them. They always seem to make their way. But the thing is, with that, GM clearly has to try to make some money here. And in the situation right now, we're facing still continued big inflation. We haven't dipped over to that recessionary state yet. There's clearly not a lot of people out looking for $150,000 trucks anytime soon. Sure, there's spotty segments of the marketplace, but unfortunately, there's less and less people with that appetite to spend that sort of money. So what kind of problems are GM going to face in the next year or two? This was their breakout year, 2023, and they clearly missed the mark. Mary Barra clearly also is probably not too far from looking down the end of the road here. And when that happens, what do the next players look like? What are the next CEOs talking about, and where are their places in making an impact on that organization? I mean, going back to goons like Rick Wagner or as well as Roger Smith could mean that that whole EV marketplace goes bye-bye. And now while they can continue selling internal combustion engines, that is a shrinking marketplace. And as I said in a previous video, we're seeing in Europe already that the electrification market is already creeping up on 7% of the overall vehicle sales. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below there. Please do drop a line. And as well, on top of that, be sure to check that video. That's all about Ford's market collapse. Nobody's buying those trucks, and there may be no future. And with all of that said, be sure to check out that right there. That's Ford's truck market collapse, and I don't know if they have a future. Be sure to check it out. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.